Namaste, good evening everyone, and welcome to this webinar on Will the West Make It? In such turbulent times as today, every community needs to be able to turn to people for guidance, encouragement, and perhaps even leadership. With the increasing tide of anti-Hindu, anti-Indian rhetoric, the Indian community is asking the question, why us? I remember in 2013, there was a conference in London called Dharma Rising, organized by Pandit Satish Sharma, and then a year later, Prime Minister Modi came to power. Since that time, we've seen an increase in the influence of Dharmic philosophies across the world. And then a few years ago, I met Dr. Ankit Shah, who was also seeking to give guidance to the Indian community on the basis of economic analysis, as well as a deep understanding of Dharmic principles. Many of his predictions are now coming true, exactly as he said they would. And so it gives me great pleasure to invite two people who, in my experience, are margdarshaks, who've displayed the capacity to reflect deeply and articulate a possible future for all of us. Ankit Ji is a Dharmic economist, analyzing the interplay between economics, cash flows, and geopolitics with remarkable, uncanny success over the years. He's authored many books and runs a YouTube channel to educate and prepare Bharatiyas for future challenges. Pandit Satish Sharma is a Dharmic scholar who brings deep civilizational and philosophical perspectives to the discussion. He's a public speaker, organizer of the very prescient Dharma Rising conference over 10 years ago, and author of the book Caste as a Colonial Conspiracy. Ankit Ji and Pandit Ji, very warm welcome to you both.
Pranam ji, namaskar, Jai Shri Ram. Thank you very much, Navita ji.
So this talk will be about an hour and with some Q&A at the end if we have time. So feel free to put some questions in the chat and we'll try to address them towards the end of the program. Now, before we begin the discussion, let me just invite both speakers to make some opening remarks on the subject, and then we'll start with the main questions. So, Ankit Ji, would you like to go first?
So thank you for arranging this for the NRI community, Pandit Ji, Navita Ji, and the entire team, because we are at a point where this has become critical as headlines are pouring in and social media is completely pushing anti-India narrative at the moment. So when you see posts coming in from various countries, especially the Five Eyes nations, the white collective, you are seeing a lot of abuse to Indians and Indian culture and all kinds of stuff. Even if they find out some minor criminal activity or any kind of act, they would pose it as a global phenomenon, and it's become horrible how they are targeting Indians across all the media platforms, particularly after the American administration has become vocal about the Indian government and tariffs and whatnot. After that, it is like a political go-ahead given to all the nations that, oh, yes, you all can do it. So at this critical point, it becomes necessary for the diaspora to understand what exactly is going on and what is going to be the path forward, so that they can take some preemptive measures and not just secure themselves, but also secure their financial well-being. So that is a thought with which I have come here today, so that we can place some points, some facts about the Western economies, why what is coming, and what could be the preemptive measures which can be taken by the community and the diaspora.
Thank you, Panditji.
Andy, wonderful. Before we jump in deeply, just invoke a very simple piece of guidance that we have from our Rig Ved, and we're all desperately in need of this guidance. Many of us will have come across Asatoma Satgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. And I don't think there has been a time when that perspective has been as important as it is now. We have heard very recently of Indians in Ireland being attacked and one gentleman almost had his hand severed. There's a great deal of violence, there's a great deal of confusion. And I think hopefully myself and Ankit ji, Navita ji, with your curation, will add a little bit of clarity. If we can see what the reality is, we can then decide what our choices need to be. And so I'd invite everybody to proceed on that basis. As we go into the talk, there's a question which I think would be really wonderful if everyone holds in mind. And the question is very simply this: considering where we were only a year ago and considering where we are today, is the diaspora feeling safer or more unsafe? And at the end of our talk today, please revisit that question and have a serious reflection on how we've gotten here and what we can do to move forward. And so when I come to deliver my talk, I'm going to actually talk about the civilizational dimension. Ankit ji is wonderful at articulating some very specifics and pulling together facts and data. I'm going to step back and try and use our Dharmic framework and our Dharmic lens to look at the West and see whether the West can make it. In my opinion, the West has approached a civilizational chasm. It is standing at a particular point, and the question is, will the West cross this chasm? And in order to do so, do we have a role to play? Do we have some guidance to give to them? Does the Hindu voice need to be at every table contributing towards crossing this chasm? If we are unsuccessful, if this civilization is unsuccessful, then as far as the Dharmic lens is concerned, there'll be a great deal of suffering. And so that will be my perspective. And hopefully, Ankit ji and I can piece together a picture between the two of us, which will enable each and every person to be able to go forward and make decisions for their family, for the well-being of their businesses, for the well-being of their community, and also to be able to fulfill our obligation. Remember, we have a concept of Garam Bhumi and Janam Bhumi. And we're the only civilization which has those two concepts. We perform dharma to the best of our ability on both. And now those of the diaspora who are actually seated in a bhumi which is not their janam bhumi, it's time for us to review where we are and how we can move forward. So I look forward to what I'm sure will be a very stimulating exchange. Thank you, Navita ji.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure it will be. So let me just frame the first question a little bit with some context on the rise and fall of civilizations. NATO is not at war, at least not yet. And despite that, it will spend over 1.5 trillion on defense this year. This means less money for social programs and economic hardship for everyone. The same thing happened before World War I. Defense expenditure increased in Europe a decade before 1914. And before World War II, during the Great Depression, military spending in Germany, Italy, and Japan increased while their economies suffered. And going back even further, Rome followed the same path too. And eventually that empire collapsed. Now we see the same capital shift happening today, with trillions being diverted from productive enterprise into defense, all financed by debt, which now is so large that one day we could see a sovereign debt crisis anytime soon. I've even heard the UK and France might need an IMF bailout, which is something that one could never have imagined a few years ago. Ankit ji, this seems to be not just about weapons and war. It seems to be much more to do with cash flow reallocations. Could you give us an overview of the economic signals that you see in the West today that indicate problems ahead?
So, first of all, two important cash flow events we need to understand from the last 400 years of history. The first one being the way pound was replaced by the US dollar as the new reserve currency. That entire process meant that the American economy would avoid participating in the war, would do war supplies to European allies, and stay out while they are being paid in gold. This is one of the most important fundamental shift. Once the entire gold was accumulated by the US economy, they swiftly changed the pound with the dollar as the new reserve currency status. So what do we understand from this cash flow event? We understand that the financial reset of the entire world is only about one thing, and that is accumulation of physical gold. So what we are witnessing right now is the BRICS plus nations have decided to accumulate gold. And in the last 4 or 5 years, they have completed this process. At this point in time, they are at an average of 24% of their central bank reserves in physical gold. As soon as they reach 25%, the impact on the US dollar would become visible in terms of exchange rates. So we are only waiting for 1% change at this juncture for that to reflect on the US dollar's reserve currency status. Okay, this is one important cash flow event. Second important cash flow event is those powers to be who take decisions and call shots. They dumped Europe once UK interest expense crossed the defense spending, which is to say that they made maximum amount that they could make for themselves by exploiting Europe, by scripting whatever they did for all those decades, and then they left for US. Now the US economy has reached that point where the interest expense is crossing the defense spending, the same position at which UK was dumped as a global power by these powers to be. So now it is US's turn to be dumped, and we enter multipolarity. So there's a closure of 400 years of cycle of single country reserve currency as we go into a multipolar world where you would no longer require a single country's currency to be in between for international trade. So these are the two big cash flow events which have now completely reversed and are clearly visible. As far as UK's economy is concerned, what we are seeing is the debt to GDP raising at 96%, and the birth rates are gone. And the way you're seeing illegals being called in, and what has become of London. And I was reading how NRIs hold maximum properties in London. So I was wondering how they made that decision. It is very important for people to understand that a value of an asset is going to be something 20% plus and minus of your neighborhood. So if your neighborhood is being replaced by choicest radicals who have come from West Asia, the value of your property will be shredding zeros from it. So we got to understand Europe right now is standing at a position where they are going to face crusades after 2030. And it almost seems like London is going to be the hub of radical terrorism from where a lot of these messy things will begin. So I would end at that.
Quite a dire prediction, Ankit Ji. And for those of us who live in London, it's hard hearing that, but we see the signs, so it's quite possible. Panditji, if I move to you, taking a step back, would you look at it from a more civilizational perspective and maybe talk about how the moral and spiritual state of a society relates to its rise and fall? And are we seeing patterns of that forming in the West today?
Right, trying to lift everyone's spirits after Ankit Ji's very desiccated and very, very harsh analysis. Before I move on, though, I would remind everybody that prior to the horrors that were visited upon the Kashmiri Pandits community in the 1990s, only 2-3 weeks ago, nobody believed it could happen. And that prior to the exodus from Uganda, nobody believed it could happen. And there have been many such instances where the speed with which change has occurred has caught everybody literally short of breath. And so I'd just ask everyone to bear in mind that sometimes the unexpected happens so quickly, and a prudent person is one who tries to perhaps dig a well before the fire it catches fire. So just stepping back from what Ankit ji has shared, I remember a conversation that Mahatma Gandhi ji, I'm so sorry, I said Mahatma, Gandhi ji is reported to have had, where he was asked, what do you think of Western civilization? And he said, I think it would be a good idea. And if there was one thing Gandhi did know, it was Western society. He knew how it functioned. He had studied in London. He did his studies at the bar, and he had worked for the British institutions in South Africa and elsewhere. So he knew what Western society was. And so for him to pass judgment immediately without giving it a deep sense of reflection and say, yes, Western civilization would be a good idea, I think we can take from that as a starting point the notion that he didn't feel the West had actually completed its journey towards civilization. And so I'm going to pick up with that particular point. From our perspective in Bharat, the civilization in Bharat actually completed what I call the civilizational arc many, many hundreds of years ago. Imagine a nation where there is more than adequate food, mangoes growing on every corner of every field, a climate which is incredibly hospitable, protected on the north by mountain ranges and protected on the south by seas and oceans. It created an environment in which human beings had plenty, and they could actually work on what is it that we exist for. They explored the deepest questions and came to understand what a civilization, a process of human beings becoming the pinnacle of civil beings, actually was. And we mapped it very, very clearly. We identified the four Purusharth, that Karma and Artha are necessary. And then Dharma is the way in which Karma and Artha interact for the benefit of all beings and all of creation. It's the harmonious use of Karma and Artha. And then, if you do master those, Dharma automatically leads you to a sense of moksha, which is Anand without having desires, without needing to satisfy Anand with any external impetus. And that then is the pinnacle of a civilization. If I can break it down at an individual level, I look to see a civilized person as somebody who is fully mature when it comes to IQ, so they have developed their thinking faculty and are not slaves to their thinking. They have fully developed EQ, emotional quotients. So as a human being, they have matured in their sense of feeling, empathy, compassion, all of those aspects of a human being. But then there is a dimension which only we have ever maximized in a manner which we could reproduce and teach others. SQ, spiritual quotients. And once you have a spiritual quotient as an evolved human being, then you know how to navigate this creation. And rather than thinking that creation needs to be fixed so that you can actually replicate and clone the level of civilization or barbarianization where you're at, you actually begin to understand that creation has its own purpose, and you become a participant in the harmonious functioning of creation. That is what I would say is a civilization. If we look at where the West is at this moment in time, it hasn't even yet mastered intellectual, the IQ aspects. In the Bhagavad Gita, we're taught that the mind is the best of servants, but the worst of masters. And so when we look at the societies that have been created, what I see is actually societies where run-amok minds are actually in charge, and they are not actually servants of the people themselves. The increasing levels of suicide across the West, in the US particularly, and the increasing levels of mental illness across Europe would indicate that there is something in what I've just said. So when I looked at the journey of the West as a journey of civilization, it's actually got a long way to go if it's going to cross this chasm. And I looked for evidence of that. And at which point in history did that sort of go wrong? It's easy to make sweeping statements about nations and peoples, but I'd also like to just point out that there are two groups in all of the European nations. First, there are those groups who are enjoying the fruits of centuries of slavery and colonial theft. And that's in the minority. They are the few. The second group are those who have actually been taught nothing about the first group and the real history of what they did when they went out into the world. And that second group is actually completely unaware that they too were enslaved by the people who have been dominating the discourse and the power and the resources across the whole of Europe. And what we're actually seeing now across the world is the second group who are saying, we were told and we were sold a lie. We believed we were in democracies, but we've never been party to the major decisions that have been made. When the British went to war in Iraq, it wasn't after a referendum, it wasn't after the British people's voice was taken. The involvement in the Ukraine, there's been no consultation in that either. There are so many instances where decisions have been made, supposedly with a democratic mandate, but there's no evidence of a democratic mandate. And so that second group are actually the group who are now beginning to notice that there is something not quite right, that the masters are not the servants, they are not public servants that they have always portrayed. And so I think the rise of a genuine democracy, that gives me a great deal of comfort. I can see that the people are saying, we want governance by the people, for the people, of the people. What we do not want is governance of the people, by the few, for the few. And that is the turmoil that we're beginning to see at a societal level here in the United Kingdom. And so when I was looking for evidence, I remember Samuel Huntington, who wrote this book, Clash of Civilizations. And to my mind, civilizations don't clash. There's only ever a clash when there is a barbarianization present, because civilizations would work out civil discourse on how to move forward. But he was speaking from that position of ethno-narcissism, which is a feature of the commentators in the West. And he said the West won the world not by the superiority of its ideas or values or religion, but rather by its superiority in applying organized violence. Now, that is the definition of a barbarianization in action. The organized application of violence is completely adharmic. And so we are beginning to see signs of that appear yet again. But we know that that cannot lead to a situation where you can cross the chasm. The first group who I've mentioned, they are masters of divide and rule. They have worked out, I can almost see the matrix when the British came to Bharat, they drew a matrix and then they wrote every identity grouping on the top. They put languages, they put castes, they put states, they put religion, each and every grouping was matrixed out. And then they worked out, how can we set column A, 2, against column B, 3? And a strategy came out, and that was divide and rule. So we are now also beginning to see divide and rule being applied in the European nations by that first group. And so these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to contribute into the thinking space so that everybody can start to have a look at what's been going on. I would say there's one thing which everybody I would implore bear in mind, and that is that there is a weapon of mass destruction that people who wield divide and rule have mastered, and they use it everywhere, and that is hatred. So just ask yourself at every point, who is it who is teaching you to hate? Because hate is the seed with which a nation can actually be destroyed in a matter of weeks. We've seen in Bangladesh a civilization where Hindus had been investing and working hard. Just imagine how many hours of hard work went into that civilization to build those businesses, to build those mandirs, to build those temples. And yet when hatred was ignited, suddenly it washed away, and there was no way that it could be resisted. It washed away all those man, woman, child hours of sadhana and effort. And so who is it who's asking you to hate? Bear that in mind, and I think there is a possibility that we can navigate that. Back to you, Navita.
Thank you. That's quite a lot of food for thought. I'm sure it's going to require several hours after this webinar to really sink in. Just coming back to some more practical issues. Ankit, you mentioned the dollar is losing its reserve currency status, and you've been speaking about de-dollarization for many years now, long before the media and most other commentators. Can you talk about what are the risks for people's wealth as this happens? And if you could touch upon the outlook for India and the rupee during this period as well, like what should the diaspora community be doing right now to protect their assets and wealth if this not if, but when this de-dollarization gathers and takes up steam? Ankit, I think you're muted.
Now it's audible?
Yes,
Yeah.
you are.
So the very first hit would be the accumulated wealth of the people. Because if you look at the pattern with which they scripted the First World War as well, you'll find as soon as the First World War ended, you had the Treaty of Versailles, where they finished off the industrialized the entire framework that the Western Europe had. And then you had Spanish flu, and then you had LGBTQ happening across Weimar Germany. And then by the end of the crisis, what they did was gold confiscation of the citizens, 1929-30. And the way they opposed the LGBTQ stuff, and then Hitler was to power, and then you saw how the seeds for the Second World War was sown with that crisis. So you see a similar pattern right now as well with Corona. They try to make people away from each other physically so that we all could be taken towards a digital currency world, giving us a habit to stay away from each other. So Corona happened. After that, Ukraine conflict, with which deindustrialization of Western Europe, because this entire cheap energy access was taken away from Western Europe, the Russian cheap energy. And then LGBTQ in the West. And then, God forbid, I am not saying gold confiscation this time, but certainly it looks like that since they have cryptos this time, so whatever magic play that they're going to do, they will do in cryptos. So ideally, gold confiscation should not happen this time. But this is exactly what happened during that period as well. It's the same pattern, which means a massive amount of currency devaluation and wealth wipeout is very much possible at the end of 2029-30. I see crisis period at least until November 2027. From November 24 till November 2027. So if you look at, say, for example, if I am to quote you data just for UK, for example, you would see how the GDP growth from 2021, it is sliding. From 2021, the GDP growth came down half by 2022. And the latest data for 2025, the first quarter and the months that we have, it is showing minus 1.5% growth for UK. It was 8.6% positive in 2021. Right now, it is minus 1.5. This is a dire situation in which the economy has gotten to. So a lot of cuts in the social benefits which the Western countries have been distributing all these years, because a lot of dollar Federal Reserve supplies, swaps were available to all these allies currencies, which is why they were allies in the first place. So this infinite source of dollar printing kept the numbers of wealth and the number of assets, the numbers for the stocks so high for all the Five Eyes nations, all of their allies. Now what happens is, as Donald Trump cuts out this entire funding for NATO, entire funding for the allies' central banks, you're going to see a real wipeout of wealth from this. I mean, I'm expecting this last quarter, the sliding to begin. From here on, it goes till 2029, 2030. So it looks like if an NRI is going to compare with some of his counterpart in Bharat and say that he's from the same batch and he's also having some equal qualification or an earning potential, and then if he's going to compare his accumulated assets with his friend in India, 2029, 2030, then it is going to be a big shock for the NRIs. This is what my understanding is. So the priority as of now, as we already know that President Trump has announced 1% tax on remittances from January 2026. You never know with this person what percentage it can become. Now, the idea is that they want you people out of the West, which is why they have kept this percentage low. But when they realize that you people are not leaving the West, they will try all kinds of taxation, separate kind of a discriminative taxation so that you people leave the West. So they are going to check whether you leave on your own or not. And if that doesn't happen, all sorts of discrimination in the workplace setting and everywhere it will begin, including that the potential layoffs that are coming because of this crisis. They would single out Indians and throw you out of jobs and offices, despite the fact that they know that Indians cannot be replaced because of this kind of skills and hard work that we do. Despite that, they're going to attempt this. So, because there is no logic to racism, Navita ji. I mean, you tell them, well, you will say, I am so much skillful, I'll work 24 hours. I'm not a nuisance, this, that. You explain them anything. It's pure racism. There's no logic about it. So they are going to single out Indians. Now it is very, very clear that the signals were given politically from the top across the West, which is why the social media abuse started. And the way they are conveying their citizens that it is Indians who are taking your jobs, it is Indians who are taking your benefits, while the fact is it's just a minuscule percentage of their total population. Despite that, they are fixated on targeting only Indians. And let me tell you, there is a background to this because the way Indian government has been speaking, our ministers, our prime minister, our foreign minister, the way we Indians have been projecting ourselves in the last 10 years, whether the West would agree or not, but they are scared of us now. They're really scared. So they really think that we are a threat to their crown position. So now to expect that any kind of support is going to come from the West to the Indian government or Indians anywhere in any country, that would be too much of a wishful thinking. Okay, when we were low, when we were poor, when we did not have so much economic progress, when our ministers would silently listen whatever was being told, that was a position where they were at least considerate enough to even listen what we were saying. Now at this point, they have realized that we are a challenge for them. So even during Operation Sindoor, if you realize the shift in the foreign policy, previously what we used to do was we would say that these are the proofs of terror attack. Please see, Pakistan has attacked us. This is what we used to do. Now what we have done is we hit them and then sent the delegation saying, see, we hit them. So this entire shift which has come in the Indian assertiveness in a way, that is exactly why they are feeling threatened. And that is going to reflect upon NRIs as, them seeing you as a big threat, because to their understanding now, I'm not saying you are spies, but to their understanding, now we are collecting all the information for the growth of Bharat. It is now what their mindset is now. Okay. So for them, it's like that Pakistani nuclear scientist who was collecting all data and then made a nuclear bomb for Pakistan. So for them, each and every NRI is now, collecting data, taking up skills for the growth of Bharat. So now they see you as a threat. That is the change which has come. So we Indians and the Indian government now no more are seeking support from anybody. So we are like, okay, somebody hit us, we went and hit them. We don't even care what your opinion is. And this is what we are showing, that we are going to hit them again. So this attitude has, gone, gone too far for them in their minds, that it is too much for Indians to do. So that is what is going to reflect upon locally to you as well, because there are white citizens who are now asking their government, oh, well, this is the India you were talking about? Just look at how they behave. I mean, they are so confident. They are assertive. They are talking about what their viewpoints is. They are not just that. We are now leading the entire global South, 100 plus nations. We call in Bharat, in Delhi. We set the agenda for 100 plus nations. We got Africa represented in G20 and BRICS plus. So to them, now each and every Indian is a threat, despite the fact that you are not, but that is the category they are going to pose you in. So it is very imminent that they are going to increase this tone of insults and this tone of attacks further and further, because they will not just see a lot of Western companies informing them that the whites do not have that skills to replace Indians, because this is a feedback which companies are going to give them at the end of the day. So it becomes more and more difficult for them to balance both the chunk of citizens who, especially a chunk which now sees you as a big threat to their own survival, when massive layoffs are coming with this economic crisis. Besides that, the SEO summit, that the pictures that everybody has seen, and the way they painted Xi Jinping and Putin as some kind of villains of the world, and the way Bharat is comfortable with both of them in that kind of a presence. So it's going to be more and more indigestible for them to even justify to their citizens that, oh, this is the India you were talking, our ally. Well, that's a question mark. So going forward, NRIs will have to prepare for shifting bases if that is what is required for physical security, because what will you do with money if you're not physically safe? So one is the financial part. Second is going to be your own physical security, especially of the children, because what I'm noticing when I talk to consult NRIs, the common problem that is posed by them is, Ankit ji, we are totally okay with shifting back to Bharat or UAE or Bahrain somewhere, but then our children are in colleges or schools, and they are totally denying this shifting decision. This is the primary problem a lot of NRIs are facing, especially the ones who are now clear about what is coming. So not just you have to plan your own future, but also plan the future of the next generation, which is inevitably going to face the same kind of brutal attacks, especially when your number strength would be getting lower and lower going forward, because the starting batches leave the West, the batches which stay behind, there's absolutely no one to even get the information that they are being brutally attacked, because the media will also completely black out. They will not give out any information. So the ones who are going to stay back, they are going to be in more and more danger zone going forward. Whereas the ones which come back, they obviously they are going to have difficult time adjusting to Bharatiya scenario, and obviously the school, colleges, and a lot of stuff is very different compared to the West. But at least their life starts get going. Okay. And at least they are saving themselves from the wealth wipeout, because if you're going, as I said, if you're going to compare the new INR rate in 2029-30 of dollar or pound, then definitely you will feel a shock, because you worked your entire life, saved money, bought properties, and all of a sudden the zeros are vanishing from it. And there's no explanation other than some headline coming in and saying, well, the party is over. So you're totally clueless how those zeros went out of picture. So yes, Panditji.
Panditji, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, again, trying to find comfort in a much more Dharmic perspective. There are two things that I just want to re-emphasize, picking up on what Ankit ji said, which are actually, I think, an invitation for us to engage in all of these nations. You know, we have 4 generations of investment in very, very difficult nations across the last 150 years, right? And we have seen real racism, but equally, we have seen how the common man in England, I'm going to use as an example, is actually quite decent, fairly straightforward, quite naive, and not overly complicated, and are looking for good relationships as well as genuine diversity and cultural engagement. That's been my personal experience, right? For 60 years in this country, I grew up amongst the English and the Irish. And I know the English and the Irish, and they are really great people. I remember somebody who wrote an article once. He wrote a comment. It was Will Durant. He said, the English are the best of all people, and the British are the worst. And so it brought to my mind that even at that time, there was a distinction. And I just want to emphasize that distinction as well, because I think racism is too simple a bandying. If we drill down into it, then there are some other things that are at play. And the aspect that I wanted to emphasize was that I never met a British person until I came to London. And then I encountered what this British being was, and it's a very unique identity. It's separate to the identity of the Irish. It's separate to the identity of the English. The British identity is actually the colonialist identity. And what we're seeing now is even the indigenous English people are talking about their own English indigeneity, and they are using the St. George flag, which is a white background with a red cross. They are saying, hang on a moment, we too are an indigenous people. And it's quite remarkable. If you listen to some of the remarks that they're making now, they're the same remarks that people in Bharat have been making against their oppressors, against the colonizers. It's exactly the same rhetoric which is coming out now. The strange thing, though, is that you talk about the Five Eyes. In the nations where Europeans dominate by colonization, they still talk about themselves as almost as though they have a right to be in those places. It's a presumed authority that we have the right to be able to complain about immigrants who came into these places, even though we were actually possibly immigrants. That is missing in their conversation. And I just want to touch on that because that's really, really important as to who the identity is, where the problems lie. You know, we talk about the Bengal famine and how the British and Churchill particularly knew exactly what was going on and diverted huge amounts of grain stocks and quite happily said that, you know, it's more important that we feed those who are of a Greek ancestry than we feed the Hindus and, you know, they breed like rabbits or something like that. But only 100 years earlier, the same Brits had done exactly the same to Ireland. And in fact, in Ireland, there was a scholar who said, and I'm quoting, no issue has provoked so much anger or so embittered relations between England and Ireland as the indisputable fact that huge quantities of food were exported from Ireland to England throughout the period when the Irish were dying of starvation. So there are groups of people whose value system hasn't actually evolved. They are still very much in that early stage of de-barbarianizing, shall we say, their own understanding of what it is to be here. And you mentioned the SCO gathering, and I think there was something really important that was mentioned, but hasn't really been picked up upon. And Prime Minister Modi mentioned the word sovereignty. Now, sovereignty and respect for sovereignty has been fundamentally absent from the Euro-Christian understanding of who they are in the world. You know, ever since the doctrine of discovery came out, which said if you're Christian and European, you're the only human beings and everything else you can exploit. And the word discover actually meant that you could deprive indigenous people of their rights. There was a statement which Churchill made to just remind everyone of how recent this was about the British perspective on sovereignty. And he said, I do not agree that the dog in a manger has the final right to the manger, even though he may have lain there for a very long time. I do not admit that right. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the Black people of Australia. He went on to then say, I do not admit that a wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. This was the Winston Churchill, who has been elevated to being the savior of Europe in the Second World War, and we shall meet them on the beaches and all of that sort of stuff. And so my suggestion is that the process of moving from a barbarianization to becoming a civilization is actually something that we have to contribute to the common people and support the common people in all of these nations to understand that India and Bharatiyas do not have that same racist approach, that we do not approach it from the point of view of immigrants. We have the vision that after 8.4 million incarnations in lesser physical forms, a human being incarnates, and that a human being is a pinnacle of incarnation, and that's divinity manifesting. You know, we're the only tradition which have said that to be a human being is innately divine, and that we're on the journey to realizing our divinity, and that applies to every single human being. It doesn't apply just to people in a tiny little island on the cold end of Europe. It applies to every human being. And we're the only people who have had that perspective, which is a fundamental perspective of democracy. Because democracy says that you can rely on the majority of people to do good things, and that it's a toxic minority who actually are confused and do bad things. And so if you consider that, that's the foundation of democracy. If you believe that people are inherently sinners, people are inherently evil, and they need to be controlled, and they need to be managed, then you don't believe in democracy at all. You believe in either theocracy or dictatorship by monarchy. And so the claim that we are democracies is actually, it doesn't rest well on the shoulders of European countries. What it does do is it highlights to those who know that there's only ever been one successful democracy which has truly believed in the goodness of human beings, and that is Bharat. Even though we didn't call it a democracy, to be a dharmocracy is fundamentally to accept the panchayat system right the way up to the rashtra, that human beings, by and large, will do good things for each other and for everybody else and for every other being. And that, I think, is something we have to share very aggressively, very assertively, very confidently in every single country where we are the diaspora. Now, if that's the case, then we have actually got a chance of perhaps even snatching victory from the jaws of defeat for a change by sharing this in the European nations. And I think that is an incredible challenge. It's a wonderful challenge, and I think we should all rise to it. It's in the Bhagavad Gita, you know, Arjuna is told that a warrior is not judged on the successes and the defeats. He's judged on the scale of the battle that he is willing to leap into and engage in. So we have got an opportunity to really contribute some incredible understanding and help as many of the people in these Five Eyes nations who themselves are actually the subjects of enslavement without them knowing it, and the targets of injustice, which is going to increase. So I just wanted to respond to some of the things that Ankitji had said by adding those bits of understanding to the conversation.
That's great. No, thank you. I think what you've said makes a lot of sense, but if we take a step back, and I'm reading from what Ankitji has said, that in order to be able to make that contribution, NRIs need to be safe, and we need to be able to live our lives without all the predictions that we're now getting and what we're seeing on our TV screens and YouTube screens with all these attacks on Hindus, Indians in Ireland, in Australia, anti-immigration protests. It's a little confusing for us to think, should we be staying in these countries, or should we be packing our bags and moving back to Bharat, which is where we were all originally from? And I just want to pick up on something that both of you mentioned, which was this unprecedented SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China, and this coming together of all the BRICS nations, it points to a much more multipolar world order emerging, which is quite a historic turning point from the hegemony of the West over the last hundreds of years, especially when you think that from about 2020 onwards, all the BRICS countries represented a bigger economy than the G7, the Western liberal world order, so to speak. So we're seeing a very important power shift towards the East. But then on the other hand, as the Western economies are declining, there's much more anti-Indian, anti-Hindu sentiment. And it's becoming clear that multiculturalism seems to be out of favor in the West. Even if it's only at the grassroots level at this stage and not at the political elites level, it does seem to appear that on the streets there is an issue with multiculturalism. And I wonder, are these two linked in some way? On the one hand, we've got the rise of the East and a more assertive Bharat, like Ankit Shah said. And then on the other hand, attacks on NRIs, almost as if they're being made scapegoats, or people are threatened, or the Western governments, elites are threatened by Indians, and NRIs make very convenient scapegoats to distract their populations from mismanagement of the economies. And in a situation like that, how would you say the diaspora Hindus could protect themselves? So what are the kind of practical steps they could take? Ankitji first and then Panditji. Ankitji, you're muted.
So, the first and foremost step that the community needs to take is to make regular community gatherings. This is the first step, because that is where at least you will be getting information about where, at what location, what kind of incidents are happening, and how people are being treated, mistreated, maybe at the workplace or something. So regular community gathering should be the first step. Now, whether you do it at some mandir premises or some community hall or that kind of a thing, but community gathering is the first and the most important step. So I'm talking physical meets and not social media or online meets. Okay, because these gatherings would require you to also prepare for what would come. When in terms of if somebody would need emergency help, whom to contact, where to contact, in terms of emergency, if some attacks happen on children or people of old age, where exactly to go, whom to complain. These primary steps need to be very clear across the community. So that is where you can lay the plans for community in the community gathering. Second thing, what you need to do is immediately prepare for the financial security, especially of your assets. So one thing is very clear: a big housing crash is coming. And since what it looks like, as I've predicted, the US wants a housing crash in US. So it is very natural that it is going to cause housing crash in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and UK. Because that is how they do the trial and error. First, they do these things in the allies countries, and then they do it at their country. So a big housing crash, especially in tier one, what I call as the fiat dollar regions or posh areas. If you want to save yourself from there, you have to immediately, get rid of those properties and park your savings in tier 2 and 3 in Bharat. Again, don't pick tier 1 in Bharat. Pick tier 2 and 3 cities and park your savings in land or real estate assets or that kind of thing in Bharat. Okay. Second thing, what you can do is your investments, because a lot of Western stock market are totally overpriced. So when this big global crisis comes along with the currency reset, there will be a hit to the Western stock markets as well. So if you understand the exit time and the best place to invest again in Bharat, so irrespective of where you decide to shift and whether you decide to shift or out of the West or not, and where you decide to go, irrespective of all of that, the investments have to come to Bharat. Okay. And then if you are so keen to stay in the West, after this entire crisis and reset completes, maybe 2029, 30, you decide to still stay back in the West, you take back the foreign currency at the new rates, and maybe you would be able to buy twice or thrice the property size with the new rates of the dollar INR rates. Okay. So this
So you're
is the
saying
emergency.
sorry, just to be
Yes.
clear, you're saying that the rupee is going to strengthen and all the
Yes.
Western currencies are going to get devalued. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
it's a good idea to switch to rupees now, and then maybe 2029, 2030, the rates will have reversed, and you could then switch back into foreign currencies and be much
Yes.
better off.
So if at all you feel that you still want to live over there and you would like to have property, then 2029, 30 is the right time to buy back the properties at the new rates of INR. Okay. If at all you feel that it is the right way to go about. But at this point in time, if you are having properties in posh areas, especially tier one areas, you need to exit as early as possible because the housing crash is now very, very near. So Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and UK, they will get housing crash done, and then they will do it in US. So all the Five Eyes nations, they need to, at least if it is in tier one, you have to exit right now, right away, because there would be very less takers. As you know, the interest rates are right now very high. Okay. So rate cuts are expected, but then the earlier you exit, the better. Okay. Because right now you are getting right rates of INR. So in Indian rupees, you can park your savings in tier 2 and 3 cities in Bharat. Obviously, you have to do your due diligence in Bharat, because over here, as well as you know, many times in some rural areas, land grabs do happen. So you have to do proper due diligence, come invest after checking properly the RERA registration, if there is a if there is a construction involved, whether the land, if you are buying, if it's NA certified or not, you check out the title reports, do proper due diligence and buy in Bharat. And then maybe you can sell in 29, 30. And if at all you want to go back, or if you want children maybe still there and want to live there, then maybe you buy double the property with the new rates. But exiting right now is very important, especially also you have to time the exit for the stock markets, because as I said, they are also overpriced. So these are the primary decisions that you need to take. Also, there is an estate tax in the Western countries. So you have to figure that out as well when you're making these decisions. Besides that, as I said, um, the real value, the real currency is gold. So in dollar and Western currencies terms, obviously gold is going to go up, and the Western currencies are going to go down as we move ahead in this crisis. But in rupee terms, the gold might come down when rupee gets appreciated for a short time. But then in Western currencies terms, gold is going to go up as we move ahead in this crisis. Okay, so there is a clear upward trend for gold and silver. Yes. So, but I do not know how much safe it is to keep in the Western countries. I mean, some of you might be keeping in bank vaults. Let me be very clear, there will be a lot of banks which will collapse. So I'm not sure whether you should be putting in their bank vaults or not. So maybe you come here and put it in an Indian bank vault, safe deposit, rather than a Western one. And I'm not sure if people keep in their houses in a safe or not, whether that's safe or not. So if it is physical gold and silver, my suggestion would be buy it and keep it in an Indian locker in an Indian bank. That is more safer compared to keeping it in the West. So one proportion should go into that physical gold and silver, especially in dollar terms, it's going to go up. Okay. So these are the primary changes that needs to be taken.
Thank you. So you seem to be saying that India is going to weather the storm much better than most of the Western economies. Is that right?
Well, we are going to take a little hit, but we are not going to be in such a dire state like the Western economies. Because as we know that 75% is domestic consumption. Our economy is 75% domestic consumption. We are not an export-oriented economy. Second thing, the country has already started diversifying its exports. So we are diversifying our exports to Gulf, Southeast Asia, Russia, Japan, China as well. Even in the last quarter shows 20% jump in Indian imports in China. So we are diversifying our trade already because this was anticipated that the Western currencies would face a wipeout. So this entire this thing that President Trump has brought this tariffs is nothing but a trailer for the Western citizens to prepare for the the devaluation of the currency. So they are already making the products costlier to give a net practice to the Western citizens about what devaluation of currencies mean. You cannot buy anymore a lot of stuff, the demonic consumption the Western countries were having till now. So this tariffs is just playing like a small illustration of what devaluation of currencies means. So the products become costlier for the Western citizens. So the more and more devaluation happens, the goods that the West was purchasing from Asia and elsewhere, they won't be able to purchase so much goods. So this is how it is moving towards.
Okay, thank you. And Panditji, do you want to add something on how the diaspora Hindus could protect themselves in this coming period of turmoil? I mean, Ankitji has given us some very practical suggestions of moving to India, moving the assets over there. And I know you seem to favor a little bit more engagement with the local communities here and being a bit more participative in the decision-making process in the foreign countries. Do you still hold that view? And what would you say to Hindus?
So thank you. Great question. Thank you, Ankitji, for again drilling down and putting that detail into the conversation. Firstly, I think I should offer the disclaimer that this is meant for educational purposes. Please do your own research and take professional advice before acting on anything that you may have heard in this video. Now that we've got that out of the way, I would just want to
Yes.
make a make a couple of observations. The decision to move from the Western countries isn't something that is peculiar to our Hindu NRI diaspora. A lot of people are leaving the United Kingdom, and the decision to move from and the decision to move to, I think, are two separate decisions that should be looked at. I know a lot of people have left from the United Kingdom and set up camp in the United Arab Emirates and are very comfortable there, and we have a thriving community which is actually performing very well and enjoying a great deal of tranquility, prosperity, safety, and security. So many people have uprooted from here and settled in the UAE. It may be for a short term, it may be for a long term. I also know that there are many courageous people who have decided that they do want to return and that their future is going to be tied to the return of a very powerful and very centered Dharmic civilization. And I think all the indicators are that that's going to happen. But there are going to be some ups and downs. That is not a smooth road by any means. Ankitji, myself, and many others have pointed out that Bharat still is struggling to overcome what I call a a democracy in name only. You know, when the British left, they left something which was a democracy in name only, but intrinsically it was established and configured to, shall we say, act in the worst interests of the indigenous people of Bharat. And that still is being dismantled, and it'll take a little bit of time for equality, genuine human rights to be restored, and the state of religious apartheid against Hindus to be completely, shall we say, consigned to the dustbin of history. So it's not a smooth journey. But then I'm always reminded that we as a Bharatiya civilization, we know that we are divinity incarnate, and we know that our journey is a journey of evolving into fully self-realized spiritual beings. And so there should be no Kurukshetra where we do not have a contribution to make. I would say one last thing, and that is that nobody has a choice anymore. If you still think that this is not going to be happening and that there isn't turmoil around the corner and everything will be okay in a few months' time, I would just bring one aspect to your attention. Before COVID, I visited Leicester and spent some time with some very prominent business people and community leaders and shared with them an analysis that was similar to Dr. Shah's analysis, that there were going to be difficult times because the key drivers of anti-Hindu, anti-Indian sentiment were beginning to be present and effective in Leicester. Very few people actually took me seriously. But when the troubles in Leicester happened, all of a sudden it became apparent that the state in this country was not going to act to protect the interests of the Hindu Indian community. And now what we've seen, that the state in this country is actually very reluctant to protect even the interests of that second group of people who I refer to as the common English, Irish, Scotsman, the common people who have been targeted by unbelievable assaults on their families, their children, and particularly their young ladies. And so we are in that situation in this country and in other countries where I think the last indicator that I look for is when the state refuses to protect its own citizens. And when that happens, you have to engage. We're not quite at that stage yet, but we still have, shall we say, the signs are present, but we still have a window of opportunity for us to engage, to stop doing performative advocacy, stop doing performative events and so on, but to look for transformative advocacy, to actually become no longer appreciated, but to become respected. Ankit touched on a very important idea a few moments ago, and that was it's the Indian Hindu community who are targeted. It's not the Sikhs. It's not the other minority communities. It's not the Chinese immigrants. It's the Indian Hindu community which is targeted. And there is a reason, and that is that we have become wealthy but completely uninfluential. And that's a problem. But I think that's an invitation to engage. We're being invited to move from being just appreciated to being genuinely respected. And that really requires us to look at the way in which we organize ourselves as communities, to be able to find really good, strong voices who understand and who are supported to be able to represent the community's views. And if we do that, then I think it's a great opportunity. It'd be a great piece of work to be involved in. And for the community, it will actually be evolutionary. I often think that this particular BJP government and Prime Minister Modi ji, what would be a really good legacy? I think a really good legacy for them would be to be able to look back and say that we created an environment in which the indigenous Bharatiya identity became so strong, became so well integrated, developed its own internal community organizations and communications networks, and became so established in its own homeland that it didn't matter which government was in Delhi. That would be a brilliant legacy. And if we're going to move towards that, which we have to, then I think there's a great opportunity for the diaspora to play a role in that, to become that strong, integrated, influential, coherent, and incredibly positive contributory voice in all of the diaspora nations.
Thank you. That's much more positive. I think a lot of people will take heart from what you've just said. There's some tough decisions people have to make, whether to stay or go, and then if they stay, how do they turn the tide that they're seeing around them? So I think that your words will give a lot of support, and maybe we can touch upon that in another conversation if people want to get more detail from you on that. I think in the interest of time, I think we should look at some Q&A because we seem to have got quite a lot that's come through. So I'm just going to read them out. And then Ankitji, Panditji, please feel free to jump in with your answers. Okay, so the first one is, why is the USA doing racism against Indians but doing nothing against the blacks there? Ankitji, I think that might be a question for you.
Well, they don't see the blacks as an intellectual threat to themselves. because the most high-paying jobs and high positions are mostly challenged and taken over by the Indians in the West. So there are two types of attacks that the diaspora would be facing. One, from that crowd which feels that the Indians are intelligent and taking over their space. And then there is another section of people who think that Indians have a very savings-based lifestyle. They have intact families, they have good education, so they are not going to ask any kind of freebies from the government. So the losers feel that Indians are coming in their way of demanding freebies from the government. And the competitors feel that you are too intelligent and taking over their work. So both the sections are against you.
I would say one last point is that if you're going to bully somebody, then bully somebody who has a reputation for not punching back. And, it's something that I think we have somewhere along the lines, I call it the Somnath psychosis, right? It took 16 times for the Somnath Mandir to be demolished. Whereas, somebody along the way should have realized actually this is going to happen again and again until there is an incentive for the persons who are doing the bullying not to bully. And I think this is really something we have to learn. If you're being bullied, putting forward a defensive approach and saying, no, 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 I deserve not to be bullied has never worked and it never will work. So we need to perhaps engage with our inner Kshatriya Tattva and start to be able to embody the capacity to defend what we have contributed in all of these societies and to protect it.
Okay. How should aspiring engineers in core fields like electronics, mechanical, civil, chemical deal with de-dollarization? And what should be the factors to be considered for enterprising in those sectors?
So all these core degree holders, they are going to get now better payments after the de-dollarization process, because a lot of other sectors which were created purely out of printing of currency, especially from the single country reserve currency point of view, a lot of this services sector might face a big hit, which means the core sectors vacancies would be more and they are going to shell out more money. Obviously, it's going to take some time to go to there, because 40-50 years of dollarization has made us stingy in making payments. So it will take time despite the purchasing power coming back. But certainly the core sectors, our core degree holders, are going to get more payments going forward. The sectors to look out for, as I said, they wiped out valuations from defense and space. So defense and space are the main ones to look out for. Also semiconductor, because that at least for the next 20-30 years, it looks like a very promising sector, especially for Bharat, and farming and manufacturing as well.
Okay. This is an important question for all Hindus all over the world. How will Hindu Americans of Indian origin be safe in the US, and how can they be given safe passage back to India with Indian citizenship? That's interesting.
Panditji?
Well, firstly, you have to have an OCI. This is not an option anymore where you may or you may not want to take that decision. There has to be a mechanism for you to comfortably and safely leave the nation and re-establish yourself in an environment which will actually be quite welcoming. The capacity to protect oneself is something that here in the United Kingdom we haven't been able to do. I remember that when the Leicester attacks were going on, even the police were making announcements which were found to be not based on fact and actually contributed towards inciting further violence against the Hindu community. The local authority, the mayor of Leicester, the head of the board which was going to be appointed to conduct an inquiry, each and every one of these persons was making statements which were prejudging any outcome, and those statements were contrary to the shall we say, the position of the Hindu community from day one. So not only did the authorities, whose role it is to ensure the safety of Her Majesty's or His Majesty's citizens as they go about their day-to-day business. They reneged on that responsibility. They suddenly transformed from protecting the rights of the citizen to protecting peace. And of course, you can get to peace very easily. We're approaching a Diwali celebration, and in Leicester, I've just heard that the Diwali celebrations are going to be curtailed in the interests of safety. And when I was asked for guidance on this, I said, well, if safety is your prerequisite, then it's very easy. You just instruct all Hindus to stay in their homes, and you've got maximum safety, right? And that is not what the police's role is. The police's role is to provide safety whilst people exercise their rights as citizens and go about their normal day-to-day living and their day-to-day work. And so we have to make a decision. And I think in the US, it's going to be exactly the same. I think the reality of the US is actually going to become clear to all citizens there, especially citizens who are recent, and especially citizens who are seen to be, what's the term? There's a term I learned there, which the African American community have refined, and they've actually done a lot of work to understand how power functions in the United States. And our Hindu Bharatiya community has not done that work yet, but they have a term, they call it white adjacent or power adjacent. That there are groups of people who love to be very close to whoever's in power, even if it is at the expense of their own rights, even if it's at the expense of their own community members. And so we have to start to move forward. And shall we say, we have to empower members of our community and give them the authority, give them the representative authority to be able to speak on our behalf in the corridors of power. We have had too many, shall we say, people wandering around the corridors of power who have no representative authority. They have no capacity to consult with the community, and yet they create these little organizations purely and solely to be able to become what the African American community have called white adjacent or power adjacent. And frankly speaking, it actually harms us. I've sat in meetings with members of the government who have actually said, we want to know what the authentic position of the community is. But instead, we get a lot of people who tell us that everything is fine and that everything is rosy, and they invite us to political meetings and they give us garlands. We don't want garlands. We want to be told what it is that you want and how can you be a party to improving everybody's lot, shall we say. So we have to move from being performative. We have to move to becoming transformative. We have to move to becoming authoritative and exercising rights whilst we still have potentially access to them. If we're not authoritative or we're not confident and we're not engaging, then we will have no rights. One of the phrases a senior member of the government said to me, he said, you know, you have to understand it in these adversarial countries where the one Jo Jeeta Wohi Shivaji, right, where that rule applies. If you don't talk and you don't win, then nobody's going to listen. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. And we have to have learned that by now, and we need to, I would say, take advantage of the window that we have, and let's upgrade the way in which we work in these countries before we have no choice other than to board a flight at LAX, having been deprived the opportunity of gathering our wealth, our substance, our gold, and packing it all into 2 suitcases at 48 hours notice, and then being told it's time for you to leave because you are contrary to the interests of the state. You're all casteist. How often have we heard that? You know, all of a sudden it was raised in the United States that suddenly all Hindus became caste suppressors, caste oppressors. It doesn't take much to stoke hatred. And when hatred is walking, reason actually has very little opportunity then. It's too late.
Is the situation going to be equally bad in the Eurozone and Germany? Germany is currently opening more visas for Indians, while the Five Eyes are closing doors. Is Germany going to be as bad?
Ankit, one for you.
I think Germany is a separate case, but crusades is something is going to be common for them, for the entire Western Europe, Germany, France, this entire region. Not NRI specific attacks, but crusades between Christianity and Islam is what can be seen as in the next round after 2030 in that area. But we are looking at how President Trump is alienating the Western Europe allies, and they are looking at Bharat with a lot of hope that they would be able to replace a lot of labor and the skill sets that they have brought from West Asia with a more peaceful resources that can come from Bharat. So they have taken a leaf out of what Japan is doing and what Israel is also asking for Indian human resource. So probably out, and even the Russians are now asking. So all of these countries who are now aged are looking for Indian resources because they can understand that this is the only ones who do not create any kind of nuisance in foreign countries. But there's a sad reality that after 2030, there will be crusades because they have brought a huge chunk of choicest radicals from West Asia.
So that actually is another question that somebody sent, that what will happen to Hindus staying back in the West beyond 2030? I think you've just answered that question.
At least for the European part, yes.
Right. So they'll be caught up between the Crusades
between the two.
Navita, I'd just like to bring to your attention in response to that question. I don't know if you've noticed, I'm sure you have, that all of a sudden in the United Kingdom, we're hearing the phrase, multiculturalism is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, there are many communities here from many different cultures who have demonstrated their capacity to live very successfully, to be harmonious and productive participants, and to be genuinely committed to the well-being of the people of these islands. But they're not indigenous. And yet the phrase multiculturalism is dead has suddenly sprang into action. And this I've noted as being a tool of those who seek divide and rule on race bases. All of a sudden, they have drawn that line.
Mm-hmm.
They have not said, well, hang on a moment, you can't call all people, right, who are from outside cultures as being enemies of our state. And yet nobody is really, none of the main parties and nobody in a position of political prominence is saying, whoa, hold on a minute. No, this is wrong. You know, why aren't they saying that? In the same way that the establishment was quite happy to say that the horrors being inflicted on young white girls up and down the country in over 50 towns were being perpetrated by Asians. Okay, there were no Japanese, Chinese, Buddhists, Vietnamese, Cambodians, Indonesians, and all of the Asian groups, you know, featuring significantly in the statistics. And yet nobody was saying that, other than our own Hindu community was saying, no, this is not true. So a framework is being created, and that framework is being created by those who seek to divide and rule. And in that framework, the tragedy is that even our community is going to be targeted because the framework that's been created is on the basis of race.
Yes. Ankit ji, do you think we can be hopeful that the English, not the British, will get this Bharatiya's dharmocracy, or are we being naive? Is that ever going to happen in the UK? Maybe Panditji, I think that was your point about dharmocracy, right? Do we ever see that arising in the West, or is that a peculiarly Bharatiya feature?
It will arise because there is nowhere on the planet which is beyond the reach of Dharma. The Brahmand functions according to Dharma. But one of the corrective mechanisms is that those who have a dharmic sensitivity, they have to exercise it, right? The solution is very often repeated in many mandars where we hear people standing together saying, Dharm ki jai ho, adharm ka nash ho, right? And so without adharm ka nash, dharm, harmony, will not be restored. And so the legitimate, rightful use of force to restore harmony and to restore the balance, to protect those who are vulnerable, that is a decision that has to be taken by Dharmic nations. And when I say Dharmic nations, I would say that the global south is Dharmic knowingly or unknowingly. The First Nations were Dharmic people. They had a rishi approach to existence. They looked and sought to be in harmony with other creatures, with the movements of the seasons and the weather and everything else. That's entirely dharmic. They did not impose their untutored, unskillful ideology onto the world and the Brahmand. So when Dharma and Dharmic nations become strong enough, then I think we will see an outpouring of Dharmic Pran Shakti and also civilizational Shakti, which will spread across the world again. I would say that the catalyst that I'm waiting for is to see an incredible union between Bharat and Africa. When that returns, when the old dharmic relationship between the merchant groups within Bharat who used to trade with all of Africa very successfully, very profitably, and brought prosperity to both, when that starts to re-emerge, we will see an incredible amplification of dharmic existence. That has to happen in my mind first.
Thank you. I've just been told that we only have less than 4 minutes for this conversation to continue before we get kicked out. So let's bring it to a close. Maybe I could ask Panditji, Ankitji to maybe a minute each on some closing remarks, and then we'll wrap up. And the rest of the questions we'll try and address in the next webinar.
Ankitji?
Just some few closing remarks, Ankitji, and you're still muted at the moment.
Let me see if I can unmute you.
Panditji, do you want to go ahead in the meantime?
Yes, I think Sumitji will unmute you in a moment. But Ankitji, I've thought about how to conclude this, and I would seek to conclude it with action points that people can do. And so I would simply say, firstly, and this may be contentious in closing, keep religious people away from children for one generation. And now, when I say religious people, those who belong to institutionalized religion, hatred can be seeded when a child is vulnerable, and then it can be nurtured at a time later in the life of a child. So who is it who children are talking to? If we can keep children away from religious institutions, I think that would be a massive leap forward for all of humanity. Work to put planetary rights above human rights, and then human rights above religious rights. Anything that puts that order in place will help. And then anything we can do to protect the sovereignty of nations in the nations where we are and the way in which they behave with other nations, I think those are very, very powerful movements that we can work towards. But always, safety for yourself, your family, and your community comes first.
Ankitji, just
Yes,
some closing remarks.
yeah. So my suggestion to all the people, all the viewers here is that build your community strength. The frequency of meeting people within your group should increase multifolds. Remember, all those people who are going to discriminate in workplace setting or in your day-to-day life, they meet 4 to 5 times a day. And they run their lives with a single agenda of discriminating and othering, because the concept itself comes from their books of discriminating between blanket separation of treatment between believers and non-believers. So this is not going to go. Do not try to give explanations about how good you are an asset to the Western citizens or to the Western countries, because none of your good behavior or your lip service or your repetition of saying that you are a good resource for that particular Western nation, none of that is going to work, because something which is politically decided from the top, and when a state takes some direction, as we know in some of these incidents, none of the police is going to cooperate. In fact, I can tell you from 2024, we've seen so many deaths of Indian students in the US campuses. Not a single arrest has happened. And the argument is these were natural incidents. So do not try to justify that you are good citizens. You certainly are. But try to regain your strength. Try to negotiate with the political circles that you have been contributing financially a lot to them. So now it is time that they should also hear your point of view regarding how you are being treated in these nations. Lot of those representatives who belong to the diaspora and are actually in political positions right now, they need to make official moves whenever any incident happens. So not a single incident should go unheard, or it should not happen that the country is totally unaware that some incident has happened in some corner. So there has to be a coordinated political noise that has to be created by the community whenever any incident happens. If you don't do this, your children would be at risk. So start taking preemptive actions, regular community gathering. And as I said, as the Prime Minister has already said in one of his interviews, कि एक पैर भारत में रखो वरना पछताओगे. This was January 2025 interview given by the Prime Minister to Nikhil Kamath. These are not my words. These are Prime Minister's words. एक पैर भारत में रखो वरना पछताओगे. These were his words. So I want to conclude with that.
Thank you, Ankit, both of you. It's been a very insightful discussion. And I would say to all the listeners on the webinar, this point of view that you've heard is not often, you don't often hear this particular perspective in mainstream media, and not even much on social media. So the question then arises, who speaks for Hindus? See, the Indian government represents the country and is going to be secular, so not a civilizational voice. Where is the civilizational voice that would make such an important contribution using the thousands and thousands of years of ancient wisdom that we have? And that's going to be the topic of the next webinar, because we're not just looking to raise awareness. We want to help people to make choices and decisions, and also to help shape policy. So we'd love for you to all to be part of this process. Please follow us on Twitter, X, and register on globalhindufederation.org. And then all that remains for me to say is thank you so much to Ankit, Pandit, and to all of you for joining us this evening. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next webinar. Jai Shri Ram.